In 2003, my mother-in-law, Fervid, went from living independently in her own apartment into the healthcare center of her seniors complex. She'd felt ill, she'd had the flu, she ended up being dehydrated and was sent to the healthcare center for a few days of recuperation. What surprised us is that instead of Fervid getting better and returning to her apartment, she actually got a lot worse. She became confused, she started not recognizing us, she was having hallucinations, and we began to suspect that perhaps she was having a drug reaction. The antidepressant that she'd been put on, and one of the pain drugs that also affects serotonin in the brain, that these two were probably causing serotonin syndrome. And Fervid had many of the symptoms of that syndrome. Because these symptoms came up with the drugs. She didn't have them before these new drugs were introduced. So we met with the medical staff, presented our information, and they decided they would do a directed deletion of some of the drugs that she was on. And she recovered completely. Cognitively, she did not recover completely physically because she'd been, by this time, bedridden too long. She could not be discharged back to her apartment. One of the most important things about identifying these medication problems quickly is that an elder will lose 5% of physical functioning for every day that they are bedridden. So by the time they've been in bed 3 or 4 weeks, they are not going to be able to be functioning well enough that they can be discharged back to their home and back to independent living. Because of our experience with Fervid, I felt really inspired to try and do something about this problem. I was a little loath to do that, not being a medical person, but then I read a book by Dr. John Sloan, who has treated frail elders in their homes for over 20 years, and I understood that this is a widespread problem. And I now belong to the Polypharmacy Working Group, and we are developing continuing education on a provincial level for medical directors and medical staff in nursing homes to try and use the medication reviews to cut down on the number of drugs that elders are taking.